Make sure you follow me on the official Is Raining Monkeys Ko-Fi so you can keep an eye out for future sticker drops. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything, I was just feeling nostalgic. After what I imagine was quite the tense drive to Edwin's, John discovers the nightlife of Arkham. The glitz and glam, the drinking, the dancing, the mayor over there with 2 broads on his arm. That's disconcerting. Arthur kills the mood with the sobering reality that every single person in this club is under Edwin's boot, which means they are definitely not upstanding members of society. These people aren't their friends. Oh my god, it's one of his friends! Arthur, I'm going to... What is wrong with you? This fellow's name is Jack, and I don't like him. And I couldn't tell you why, so I'm going to leave it there. Perhaps it's just the contrarian in me who doesn't like him because Arthur does like him. Or maybe the lizard is correct. Our new friend Jack is here to escort Arthur to Edwin's office. Ooh. I haven't attempted to draw any of these characters yet, so the first thing I thought of when I thought of Jack was Jack Frost from The Rise of the Guardians, and I'm sure that's not what he's going to end up looking like. The first thing I thought of when I thought of Edwin way back when I was actually watching the campaigns was Elfman from Fairy Tale, because their names sound similar, and I imagine they sort of kind of look the same. But after I did that woo thing and was already thinking about Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians, it made me think of the Boogeyman from Rise of the Guardians, which therefore made me think of John Wick's nickname, which made me think of the Russian mob boss in the first John Wick movie. And that's kind of similar, so I'm sure he'll end up looking fine. I just wanted to take you through that exciting thought process. While we're on the subject, I don't think taking Jack's advice to talk tough with Edwin was a very good idea. And in order to illustrate my point properly, at the depth that I would like to, I'm going to tell you about his appearance in the campaigns. In the 2 times I've experienced Edwin, he does not seem like the type who would tolerate any sort of disrespect. The strongest evidence of this by far comes in a one-shot entitled The Hollow, where one of the PCs, a middle-aged janitor named Ricky, tells Edwin that his light bulbs kind of suck, and then gets punched in the gut by a goon. A goon who, suspiciously, sounds a lot like Jack, based on his relative position being similar to where John describes him sitting in Edwin's office, and him still being in there even when all the bodyguards leave. For context, Ricky is part of a small investigative team that went around Edwin's bar asking questions for like 5 minutes before Edwin wanted to talk to them and get them the hell out of his bar. This was like the first thing they said to him, by the way, and it was layered with a compliment, and he still said he, quote, didn't like his attitude. I find this very interesting because if Jack really is the enforcer, that means he would know this about Edwin and his temper and him not liking people's attitudes. In this admittedly flimsy hypothetical of Jack's intentions not being pure, I think it tells us one of 2 things about him. The best case scenario is that people remember Arthur as some alternate version of him that wasn't so manically depressed after Faroe died. The second and slightly worse angle is that everyone remembers Arthur as he used to be even though Faroe is back. So, hypothetically speaking, Jack just told the guy who he knows is mentally vulnerable, whose dead partner owes Edwin about $39,000 in modern money, give or take, that playing tough is actually totally a sign of respect in the Mafia, when other evidence suggests the opposite is true. I understand that this is a huge leap to make and is potentially a logical fallacy. I'm not advocating for this being true, I'm just telling you what I think based on what I think I know. I don't think his appearance in The Witch's Mark weakens this in spite of how civilly he plays, but I think it could show us a slightly different angle. In part 1 of The Witch's Mark, Ted and Eli visit the underworld to see if Edwin has any idea what the is going on. Also, probably weak evidence, but I think it's still worth the mention because of how straightforward it is. Harlan describes Edwin in this scene as a man of little patience. However, even after Ted loses their little wheelchair, even after Ted loses their wager, he still entertains them for just long enough to notice that they have the butcher's calling card in their pile of assorted evidence that they hand him, which is when he folds enough to start offering them routes to get information. Now, the reason I bring this up is because his appearance in Threshold is very unique to these two. In the previous two instances, even when he's afraid of Collins, it's still investigators coming to him in order to get information. Now, he's going to an investigator because he needs help. Which, for the sake of my flimsy hypothetical, I think is the reason he tolerated Arthur for so long. And also, potentially the reason he came down so hard with the threats right out the gate, because I'm not so certain he would have done that if Arthur didn't open their conversation by sassing him. This combination of elements is just something I like rattling around in my skull like a bunch of marbles. And it's probably going to get proven wrong within the next 2 to 3 episodes, so I'm enjoying it while it lasts. Once again, I'm open to it not being true. I accept fully that it probably isn't. I'm just getting into the investigative mindset. Anyway, yeah, Edwin needs Arthur's help with something that he won't tell him until he agrees to do it, which isn't suspicious at all. I guess that could go against my point. He threatened Arthur before he had even agreed to take the case. And he didn't threaten him into taking the case, he threatened him into lying to him about the case. Anyway, me when I'm in a pissing people off competition and my opponent is Arthur Lester.
If you cross me, I will take that pretty daughter of yours out of her dorm and into the street. I will make her kneel, and I will put 2 in the back of her head as you watch.
Hey, he said the thing, you know, from part 49, he said it! Edwin also worded a threat that sounded a lot like Arthur threatening Larson back in season 3. I'm gonna play both of those right now.
I have killed many men smarter and cleverer than you.
I've gouged out the eyes of men more threatening than you, murdered men more clever, and outsmarted killers far more deadly.
I promise you, you'll see the light leave her eyes, and Mr. Lester, I always keep my word.
Mr. Larson, I don't know how, but I promise you, I will kill you. I will watch the life dim from your eyes as I take your life and give your daughter whatever justice I can.
Those could be just total coincidences because I've listened to part 48 and 49 at least 8 times, but I'd like to think it's some cinematic parallels. So we agreed to take the case, and if Arthur crosses Edwin in any way, it's Parker's family and Faroe that are going to suffer. This is not inconsequential, by the way. There was a time way back when Parker was trying to set up Arthur with his sister, so he knows who they are. Edwin finally tells Arthur that he needs his way with the dead in order to figure out what happened to Robert Puckett, worried that whatever came for Puckett is coming for him next. More context, no one actually knows that Arthur can speak to the dead, or that, more accurately, John can see what happens to the dead through Arthur's eyes. But we learn from Faroe and later Detective Logan that the cops have a nickname for Arthur because of his way with being near a dead body and then suddenly seemingly knowing what exactly happened to make that dead body be dead. That nickname, as you may have guessed, is Dead Man's Mouthpiece, the title of part 1. And would you look at that, Edwin gave us more lore for Arkham. Okay, the city is split into 4 parts. Edwin has the south side, which is the city council and the docks, meaning he dealt with a lot of the bootlegging back when Prohibition was in effect. Robert Puckett had the downtown financial district, which dealt in a lot of money laundering in and out of Arkham. The other 2 are pretty elusive, with Clayton Hayes managing the farmland up north near Dunwich, whoa, and Nick McMahon in the west partying his little heart out everywhere other than here. Wherever the hell he is, I hope he stays there because it's implied that one of his operations is human trafficking. The sound that John made when Edwin said that broke my heart. After that enlightening conversation, Edwin takes Arthur to his industrial-sized fridge, which is where Puckett's body is. While they're alone, John briefly panics that the key they found on that one guy who found it on Puckett's body is something that Edwin wants. Which makes me wonder, if we're running with the theory that the guy in the greenhouse was Detective Logan, why did Logan want that key? I'm formulating a mess of thoughts that I don't think I'm going to share because it would be long. Arthur decides to keep the key anyway because it's probably nothing, and then they touch the body. Okay, Harlan, I get it, we were wrong. John does not see through the eyes of the people who are dead. He sees it as if he were a third party in the scene, which does not make the Faust thing any better, but I digress. Oh my god, Robert Puckett was killed by a supernatural thing I never could have guessed. On top of everything else, another slightly concerning part about this is John says this thing feels like a god. But that is interesting, isn't it? Then why did Puckett recognize it. Oh, now we're cooking. Edwin did imply that there was some kind of thing that happened that made it so they even had the power to take over all of Arkham. This reminds me of how Larson knew who Nyarlathotep was. Oopsie, spoiler alert. I haven't made that video yet. So, like, fourth insane theory of the video, I think this Mafia quartet is Order of the Fallen Star-esque. The four of them made a deal with something to gain all of their power within the city, but didn't quite realize the true cost. Anyway, once they exit the room, Jack is acting kind of weird, and it couldn't possibly be because Arthur just talked out loud to John about the key that they're not giving to Edwin that Edwin could possibly be looking for. For God's sakes, I wish he was just a little bit more paranoid. So I recorded all that stuff before the final chapter came out, and now the final chapter has come out, and I cannot talk about what has made me so excited because it's part of the Patreon voting thing, but So John asks Arthur if he thinks it's really their responsibility to help this city because of their abilities, and after much internal deliberation, Arthur does say yes, he does think it's their responsibility. And then they almost say Roland's line word for word this time. I don't know why it makes me so excited, but it does every time. It's confirmed that Jack is Edwin's second, which is not much of a surprise, but Jack also tells them the name of Puckett's second, a man named John Fleming. He explains that the seconds usually talk more than the four winds themselves, which is a awesome name for the four of them. I'm keeping that. And last time he saw Johnny, he'd said that Puckett seemed kind of paranoid. So paranoid, in fact, that he was seeking the help of some mystic astrologer dork or something. This could get very interesting, because way back in part 1, Puckett called someone on the phone named Johnny, and then when Arthur went there to investigate in part 2, he found out that the phone in Puckett's room where he had died was a direct line. I thought it was a little weird at first that Puckett would have to call his second in the first place, but they also just might not be as joined at the hip as Jack and Edwin are. But that also made me think the call was probably coming from inside the house, if Johnny was close enough to pull around the car in the first place. Which, coincidentally, is when the whatever that killed him came into the house, when his second wasn't there. Considering this thing is a god/ghost, we can't exactly rely on Jack's typical pattern recognition of people going after the seconds first and then the bosses, but he does admit to Arthur that he thinks someone is trying to clean house, and they're probably gonna go after Johnny next. He says he'll keep Arthur in the loop, tells him to keep his head down, and then Arthur and John head out for the night. I'm not sure if this conversation made me change my opinion of Jack, but it did offer me the possibility that maybe he's not a bad guy, he's just kind of a jagoff. He seems fine, there's just something about his underlying vibe, and I think that something about his underlying vibe is just being part of the mob. While waiting for a cab in the alleyway, Parker makes an appearance, and Arthur has to juggle a very awkward double conversation before he just tosses John in timeout with the excuse that he wants to pet a gross stray dog. Which John is fine with, by the way, he did not want to touch that dog. Parker takes this time to implore Arthur to get to work on his case, because he's starting to get really gross and he does not want to be here. Arthur still does not seem entirely convinced that this is actually Parker, and to be fair, if I knew a mad god had seen every facet of my life and could also shapeshift, I would also be very suspicious when my dead best friend starts talking to me. But even... After John saw what happened to Puckett, he said something very interesting. He noticed that Puckett recognized the guy, but what he said specifically is, or he thinks he recognizes him. So what if this thing just looks like something that someone else has killed? I have several other theories for Parker that didn't make the cut, so I will write them out right here, just in case they end up being right. I'm getting too deep. Of course there's the question as to why and all of that, but it also strikes me as weird that the dog in the alleyway could see Parker. It strikes me as very weird that John can't see or hear Parker. That could go against my own point because he could see Kane and Scratch very clearly, but he also couldn't see his own other half of the King in Yellow back in the Order. I've got to stop. Any number of these things could also just be a red herring. This podcast is so fun! Anyway, Parker says he thinks Jack is super trustworthy, which isn't helping me try and Arthur goes to bed, the end. As for design notes, I don't have much. I think the most prominent one is eventually Jack slowly morphed from Jack Frost to Twink Butcher from The Witch's Mark. I'm sorry, okay? I think it's the accent. These two frames I had fun with what John and Arthur may look like when John is using his ability to see through the eyes of the dead. I kinda sorta thought as far back as season 2 that the King's cloak would flutter when he's like exerting some sort of power, even if that power is just showing off. But I really like the idea of the crown getting more solid on John's form, sort of like how it is in his projection state or when he's in the Dark World. Also, John's crown getting all the prongs back, since he's using the power of the King in Yellow and he is technically still just a fragment of the King in Yellow. Arthur's a bit more abstract. I sort of just wanted this to be an indicator to the audience that John is using his powers, not necessarily something that would manifest in the real world, because then they'd have a bit of a problem. Arthur's already walking pretty thin ice, having inhuman bright yellow colon eyes, so I think the yellow eyes have some plausible deniability, but the floating crown, I'm not entirely sure would go unnoticed. The scrolling background I made for Edwin's place is chock full of cameos, and I will tell you one of them. The saxophonist pictured under Louis Armstrong's arm is my brother. Miss you, bro. He's not dead. He's just not here right now. There was an attempt to do Edwin's room in color, but I knew that even if I got done with the color tests in such a short amount of time, I probably wouldn't actually integrate them into the frames, so I only ended up doing one rough pass. I tried. I even watched John Wick and John Wick 2 to just try and get some ideas for what his office might look like, or some kind of color schemes at least, because the colors in John Wick are really good. But the only thing I really got from that was the hypothetical painting behind Edwin's desk, and I'm not even really sure about that, because Edwin just does not strike me as a man of opulence. That seems like more of Puckett's thing with him being in the financial sector, which is why I never actually ended up picking a painting for that wall. I also kept wanting to make stuff green, and that just does not seem like Edwin's color. Either way, I'll come up with something for the future, I'm sure, especially as we explore it in more depth. Like everything else, I came up with the thing that killed Puckett on the fly, and for some reason my brain decided it would be a mix of Entity 303 and Ebenezer Scrooge. It's got the same outer god swirls on its claws that Scratch did, and the tassel on his hood is reminiscent of the tassel on Kane's bolo tie. As for the length of this video, I didn't intend for it to be this long, which isn't saying much because I don't intend for most of my videos to be this long. But this one I went particularly off the rails because there were so many things I wanted to explore with Edwin and then the new structuring of Arkham. It was a lot of stuff that I was very interested in talking about, but I'm not entirely sure if anyone wants to hear about it. I ultimately decided not to cut anything because I loved talking about it, but also because I was already like 5 days into an already tight time crunch, and I didn't want to restructure the video and throw out the frames that I had already made. But next time I do plan on not spending so much time on theories. Unless you guys want that, I've got absolutely no problem talking even more about this podcast. But if I do keep doing that, I think I might do it in a way where it's sort of like the design segment, where it's somewhere at the end of the video, so it doesn't really interfere with the summary as much as it did this time. Again, unless you guys want that. Someone also said on Tumblr, so I have no idea how true this actually is, that Parker is canonically Chinese, and I can't say if it's canonical or not, but I got no problem with that, so Parker's Chinese. I did some exploration for Parker and Molly, but midway through I got majorly distracted doing research on, historical context and stuff, which is a real problem that I have. It was the Oscar story all over again. I got it in my head that they might hypothetically be Chinese American, and I was like, oh yes, time to learn everything I possibly can about Chinese Americans in the 1930s, because it might hypothetically influence their fashion just a little bit. I would have talked about that for this video, but it didn't really end up having anything to do with these two when it came to their designs. I'll do a video eventually at some point about the historical context behind the early 20th century, because I really find it quite fascinating. It might be woven in a little bit with Carcosa as I talk about decadence. I'm still really excited for that video. I understand applying legitimate historical context, especially to an American setting, is probably not everyone's cup of tea, because it is a circus of human rights violations that isn't even taught in public school. But when there's a crossover between a time period that I've hyperfixated on and a story that I'm hyperfixating on, the urge to stand Sakaiify it is borderline inescapable. So yeah, now that it's more relevant to the story again, it'll definitely be a video in the future. But not before I get to talk about the Middle Ages. And I think that about does it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everyone who supported me. Give me some time with the next part of Season 4. I got a little bit excited. Wado.